Coming up on this episode.
So, research suggests that high performers can be up to 400% more productive than the average employee. When it comes to complex roles, they can be up to 800% more effective and impactful than the average employee. Despite this and their impact, many organisations are struggling to retain their high performers.
We've got to be intentional. We've got to be, as you said, proactive. Asking the right questions, truly listening to the answers, because you can listen to them and not pay attention, and then your people will leave.
It comes back to a little bit about that communication piece, especially from like a leader's point of view as well, in a sense of, you know, the impact on others when that person, that high performer, leaves. You know, if you're not communicating to your team why they're left or what's going to be done about it, you know, I can only speak from a personal experience where, like, I've been in a little bit of shock to why that high performer's left, and then maybe a little bit of anger towards an organisation that maybe why haven't they done enough to keep that person.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with founder of T2, Martin Johnson. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have our performance episodes delivered by our very own T2 consultants. For now, sit back, tune in and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
So welcome to the latest episode of T2's The People Performance Podcast with me, Rich McCarthy.
And me, Spencer Locker.
So, research suggests that high performers can be up to 400% more productive than the average employee. When it comes to complex roles, they can be up to 800% more effective and impactful than the average employee. Despite this and their impact, many organisations are struggling to retain their high performers. So today we're going to explore a critical leadership challenge. Why do high performers leave, and what can leaders do to retain them, keep them engaged and keep them thriving? So, Spence, let's get to that first question straight away. How are you anyway today? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, man.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. So, Spence, what defines a high performer then? What makes someone a high performer?
Well, it'd be easy to fall into the trap of just relying on outcomes.
Yeah.
Just sort of high performers, well, they give good outcomes or exceptional outcomes, but I think it's more than that.
So that kind of like, great, they're being productive, they're putting loads of work output, getting a lot back, hitting those key performer indicators.
Yeah, I think we can't not acknowledge the consistently exceed expectations.
Okay.
I think there's exceeding expectations. I'm thinking that the key word with that is consistently. So these are people that are consistently exceeding expectations, which we would expect. But there's other things that define a high performer. I mean, we're talking about your top people, and it's more than just the level of performance, because I think they influence the rest of the team. There's a culture. They create a culture. They lead by example. When I say lead by example, they might not be leaders per se, but they inspire and influence and motivate and enthuse other people, because their subordinates or their comrades, their colleagues, are looking at how they carry themselves, how they act, their attitude to work.
So these just aren't the people that have the skill set, the knowledge of the role to hit those KPIs. These are people who are really good collaborators.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think they create. They are the pebble in the pond. They create the ripple effect. So what they do, they're sort of they're performance central, but everything sort of ripples out from them. They influence people who they directly work with, indirectly. People talk about them not only in the team, but in the business and in other related businesses as well. So we talk about high performers in other businesses that we work with. That's quite impactful, isn't it? When you've got a high performer who performs well, exceptionally well, within a business, but actually that goes beyond the business.
Yeah, 100%. And when we're talking about different organisations and businesses, I think for me, when I look at organisations, I like to see what values, are on the wall for those organisations. And I think when you look at high performers, they're the ones who just haven't got that skill set and knowledge, but they're really sort of walking the walk and talking the talk when it comes to those values. They don't have to necessarily be talking about them all the time, but you just see them in those every day-to-day actions, don't you, of those high performers in a sense.
They live it.
Yeah, like, I don't know, showing up every day and doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That might be a value of an organisation, and you can see that in the sort of core of that high performer.
They demonstrate it on an almost daily basis. And I think if we're sort of looking at this measurement, this measurement within a business, with not just the outcomes, not just the performance, but I think what we could do, because of the subject we're talking about, what would be the impact of them leaving?
Yeah, 100%.
So if we're talking, we're defining a high performer, for somebody to leave an organisation or leave a team who is a high performer, what would be the impact of that? Because you might think to yourself, well, let's say that the high performer, merely by being around and doing what they do naturally, would lift a team, would inspire, enthuse, motivate. They would naturally radiate this culture, if you like, within a business.
100%.
When you remove that, it doesn't necessarily just drop to baseline; it drops below that.
Yeah.
So now we're into drudgery. If we're looking at optimal performance, we're into that drudgery bit. So it's a massive impact. You're not just losing one person who is, by definition, a high performer, but now you're looking at how does that impact everybody else? How does that impact the culture? How does it impact the rhythm of the organisation and the rhythm of the team?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about when I've lost high performers in teams that I've been involved with in the past, and I think of one person, and they were really good at showing those sort of traits and characteristics of a high performer, not just in the days that were good and easy and we were in that flow, but that drudgery piece that you spoke about, actually showing up as a high performer when days were challenging and crisis was happening. How did they show up? And I think for me, that had an impact on me as a team member in a sense of morale and support was definitely there, especially because they were quite assertive in what they were doing. So I think you're right. You just need to also look at it from a point of, okay, that person's leaving. What are the gaps that they're leaving? But what are they taking with them as well? And sometimes it can be that morale, can't it? It can be that maybe lack of direction for junior members of the team at times. Again, if leaders put a massive emphasis on these high performers and their workload and their job role, are they becoming a bit of a single point of failure?
It's a good point.
So when they leave, that impact, are people going to be sat in the team going, oh, well, that was Spencer's job and I never really got to understand how they did that or what they did. So it's really interesting about the gap that they leave.
Well, yeah, you mentioned about how they influence, how they inspire and motivate, and you to come back to that single point of failure bit. That would be assuming that you've only got one high performer in a team.
Of course, yeah.
And now you've got to consider the gap between what's high performance and what is performance, because you could have some sort of people following on the tail, might not be high performers at the moment, but they're not far off. So if this high performer was to leave, then that single point of, I mean, I think this is really interesting when we talk about the effect on the rest of the team. If they were to leave and the team drops, I'm not saying it always will be, but the thing is, that leader, how does that leader step into the breach and sort of go, right, okay, so this particular person is leaving the team?
Or communicate why they're leaving as well.
Yeah. How are we going to step up?
Yeah.
What do I need from you guys? There may already be people who are thinking that way, because again, there's we briefly talked about the definition of high performance, the high performers. Yeah, there's performers there who can turn up on a good day and do a good job, and everything's great. But when things go a little bit wrong, that's the difference between performance and high performance. Because these high performers, you did a podcast really about internal, external locus of control. These high performers have got an internal locus of control. This is the inspiration, the motivation, the enthusiasm for the rest of the team. So again, these are things that these high performers bring along, not just outcomes.
Yeah, massively. And I think it comes back to a little bit about that communication piece, especially from like a leader's point of view as well, in a sense of, you know, the impact on others when that person, that high performer leaves. You know, if you're not communicating to your team why they've left or what's going to be done about it, you know, I can only speak from a personal experience where, like, I've been in a little bit of shock to why that high performer's left, and then maybe a little bit of anger towards an organisation that maybe why haven't they done enough to keep that person, and then that can leave a lasting impact on the other members of the team, can't it? Especially if you're part of that team and then you have to try and fill in the gaps, or then you're thinking, well, actually, where's that workload of that person going to go now? Is that coming to me? If that's not being communicated to me, am I sat there worrying or thinking about what's next?
And of course, all this, as you say, is a bit of a spiral, or potentially a bit of a spiral, but it's a distraction from productivity. Because if you're focused on that stuff, you're not focused on what you're supposed to be doing and how you're going to do it.
Exactly. So for a leader, actually thinking about what's the impact of that person leaving, there's so many different facets of it, isn't there? And how often do leaders get time to plan that post-leave when that high performer puts in their notice and they're leaving within, 2 to 4 weeks? So, I mean, that leads us into our next sort of section, doesn't it? Like, why would high performers leave an organisation?
I think there's a number of things we could consider here. There's a number of things in the sense that, are they the same? Is the organisation and the job the same? And what's the alternative?
So we're talking about situations changing over time for that high performer.
When we take, I know it's a simplistic view and trying to break it down into the power of three, but are they the same person? So that thing, let's say for the sake of argument, they came into the business 10 years ago. Bit nostalgic, but yeah, 10 years ago, it's been great to have them around. And you know what? I've charted their progress. They've consistently served the company well and blah, 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 to the point where actually I don't need to manage them. They're doing their own thing, which means that I'm getting a step away from them a little bit.
Okay.
Over a period of time, people change, don't they? Their wants and needs change, their priorities change. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a complete 180. But if you're not monitoring the situation, if you're not getting these touch points, and I'm not saying that, you know what, we need a structured monthly one-to-one where we sit down and blah, 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 which would be nice, but just checking in.
So casual conversations.
But as part of it, I mean, I'm not saying everything should be casual, but just making sure that you are being proactive and intentional as a leader to make sure that you're aware of what the current situation is.
Yeah, because everyone's lives change on a daily, weekly basis. And if you're not having those conversations, you don't know the external and internal factors that are changing for that high performer.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get to that point where you've got a 6-month performance review and you're finding out stuff that's been happening the last 2, 3, 4 months.
Yeah.
Because then you're being reactive rather than preventative, aren't you?
Sure. And if you haven't, we will come back to this word, but I'm going to use it just sort of exclusively right now. If you've been nurturing this relationship over a period of time, then it would be as a product of it being of the relationship being nurtured. It's not all on you, because if the relationship is where it should be, then they should feel safe to come to you and sort of explain things rather than you having to go looking for it.
Okay.
So I think we're not talking about your high performers leaving so you leaders should beat yourselves up. There are elements that need to be considered from a proactivity perspective, but you've also got to bear in mind that those relationships that you're nurturing, again, I mentioned earlier, I mentioned the three. I said their situation's changed. Your situation may have changed. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you're going from a small company to a medium-sized company. So let's say that this particular person joined the company when there was less than 10 people, 10 employees.
Okay.
Now you're looking at doubling from 100 to 200 or 250 or whatever. There's a significant change within the dynamic and the culture of the business. So it goes to show that actually they may have changed as well. They're not just going to lean into the business and naturally change. There's perceptions, there's interpretations, there's also all sorts going on there. So that's the external factor, the fact that actually they've changed or potentially have changed, the company have potentially have changed, but what shouldn't really change so much is that nurturing of the talent, the nurturing of the relationship.
So that one piece there of taking a hands-off approach with the best sort of meaning and will in the world for a leader, because, you know, let me give that high performer the autonomy to go on and crack on and do their job. Actually, that's a bit of a trapdoor, isn't it? So if we're not having those regular conversations, then we're potentially not understanding where a high performer sits in that moment in time for them. What other mistakes might organisations make then with the pretense of their high performers leaving?
Breaking it down into three. We've looked at what's happening with them as the individual, as the high performer. We've looked at what's happening with you as a member of as a manager or a leader of a team or a business. So that's sort of your personal. Now you've got your internal professional. I think you've got to consider your external professional. So within your specialisation or their specialisation, what's going on outside the business? What are your competitors offering? And I really don't want to stay away from the monetary reward sort of element, because that's simple and straightforward. It's the opportunities. It's the opportunity for development. It's the opportunity for your advancement. If you can't offer these, well, are you speaking to this person about what opportunities are available? Because it might not be an opportunity for promotion. It might be a sideways move. There may be other elements, other opportunities to mix it up, make it interesting, make it challenging and things like that. It's not necessarily a linear sort of promotion. So if there isn't a linear promotion, then you can't just ignore it and hope that they haven't noticed it and hope that they're happy in their job, because it may be that they aren't unhappy, but somebody can come along and say, right, 2 questions. Are you enjoying your job? You know what, it's all right. Come and work for me. I'll give you a couple of extra quid an hour or a promotion or whatever. You know, because if you're a higher performer, you will be noticed outside. Other people will be talking about you. So for somebody to come in and offer you something that you're not getting where you are now, it's got to be worth considering. I mean, no matter how loyal you are, we've got to think about, and we're talking about why people leave. Yeah. One of the things that we at T2 talk about is the situational leadership model. Now, I know we've got lots of other podcasts about situational leadership. We've got pathways about situational leadership. But ultimately speaking, what we're looking at is this. We are measuring our people on 2 axes. Are they performing? And what are the behaviours like? So positive performance, positive behaviours. So if you're looking at, let's say, a 4-box model and you're looking at somebody scoring highly on both of those axes, they're going to be in top right, yeah? Top right performance in the situational leadership model is the nurture zone, yeah?
Okay.
So if we don't nurture our top performers, who will? Our competitors.
And I guess, you know, if people do leave, our high performers do leave, and they're leaving for external factors that we're not always in control of, like you said, salary offer, that's paying them more than the current organisation is paying them. You know, that is okay. People do leave for the right reasons at times in their life.
Yeah.
I guess leaders in organisations then could also have a good process to understand why that high performer is leaving, such as exit interviews, having those conversations when people leave, so they can then go, could we have done more to retain you? And even though that person, that high performer, may leave anyway because of external job offers, etc., they can still start to build a piece for the other high performers within the team and organisation.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned nurture. Let's talk about what good leadership looks like for these high performers. Tell me a little bit more about that nurturing from a good leader point of view.
From a leadership perspective, when we consider nurturing, if we look at the core meaning behind nurture, when you nurture something, you give it the right situation, the right ingredients, the right culture to grow. And therefore, when we talk about the nurture, we are talking about giving them the right ingredients to go. I mean, if somebody is our top performer, some people are our top performers, there is a tendency to do one or two things with them. Either leave them to their own devices because you're focusing on all the other people who aren't top performers to try and get them where they need to be. That's if you leave them to their own devices, that's not nurturing. But we could also overload them with work because they are our top performers. And again, it's a short-term fix thing where you're my top performer, I'm going to give you all the jobs to do because I know they'll be done and I know they'll be done to a high level, but you're going to burn your high performers out and you're not going to develop your underperformers.
I know we've spoken about in the past around that gardener in an allotment analogy of like looking at all performers, not just our high performers, but what do they need at certain times in the year to help them to continue to grow. Yeah. Everyone's different, aren't they?
Everybody's different. They need different soil. They need different sunlight exposure. They need different water types, pH levels and things like that. But I mentioned earlier on, or I used the word intentional leadership. If you're not being intentional, if you're not, as a leader, paying attention to the details, if you're not assuming you know what this person needs or this plant needs, there's a real potential for you to do all the right things for the wrong plant and then wonder why it's not growing. Whereas if you ask the right questions and you pay attention to the details, we just said that the person changes, the role changes, the requirements of the role, the outcomes, there's lots of different changes there. You can't just set them going and leave them going. You've got to ask questions. You've got to pay attention to what the answers are. What does this person need? Let's say, for the sake of argument, somebody's a high performer and their personal situation changes. What do you do about that? If you don't know about it, then you start noticing that maybe their performance drops a little bit. And you might not notice it when it drops a little bit. You only notice it when it drops a lot. And now you're asking a former top performer about a performance improvement plan, and they're sort of sat there thinking, but I've got this going on in my personal life, and you don't know about this. Well, it shouldn't be a shock to you. Whereas if you've been nurturing the relationship, when this thing happens, whatever it is, they're going to be tapping you on the shoulder and going, this thing's happened in my life. I'm going to have to divert some energy here. When it starts becoming a distraction, or when I'm struggling to cope with it, I'll give you a shout. Please do. Thank you very much. But that's a nurtured relationship and an intentional relationship. Whereas if you're just looking at them going, you're my top performer, I'll just leave you alone, that's not going to be... It's ineffective communication.
So two big things there for high performers from a leadership point of view is be proactive and, showing that humanistic element of leadership and understanding that you have got a person in front of you, not just someone shifting, workload and being productive and getting a good ROI. You need to see the human behind that as well. Would you say there's any more elements for good leaders to keep doing to retain their people?
I think if somebody was to ask me what could a leader do today, or what could a leader do tomorrow, because it's afternoon now, so they probably wouldn't do it today, but what could they do tomorrow to retain their high performers? I don't think they'd go far wrong if they listen to what you've just said, really. I think leaning into that intentional leadership, we can't just let it happen. We've got to be intentional. We've got to be, as you said, proactive. Asking the right questions, truly listening to the answers, because you can listen to them and not pay attention, and then your people will leave. They need to be heard. Your high performers, they need to be heard. And if you value them, which you should value all your people. But this is where we break them down into the different zones, situational leadership zones, because different people need different things.
Yeah.
Your top performers need to be nurtured.
Okay.
How are you going to intentionally nurture your people?
All right. Thanks for that, Spence. I'm going to come back to that thought-provoking question and ask the audience, okay, what's one thing every leader should be doing this week to retain their best talent? So remember, high performers don't just deliver results, okay? They shape culture, they influence others and their team, and they raise standards across the organisation. Retaining these people doesn't happen by accident. It takes intentional leadership. Thanks for joining me, Rich McCarthy.
And me, Spencer Locker.
And we'll see you on the next episode of the People Performance Podcast.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2,